started, welcome. I'm Dr. Diane E, the Director of the Video Center for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule to be here to talk about never grading a quiz again. Doesn't that sound good? So, and by that I don't mean, one way to not grade quizzes is to not give quizzes, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, that works. Right, it works, but we'll take a look at the goals and then we'll do a little speed introduction similar to one of the active learning things we did. So here are the goals of today. We're going to talk for a second about the testing effect. Sample the immediate feedback assessment technique, if at. They've been trying to, like some people say IFAT, but they're trying, the company puts a star in between the F and the A to help people understand it's if at. And then we're going to practice writing effective quiz questions because that's really a key component of the process. So the testing effect, this is some research from cognitive psychologists. Roediger, I actually went to hear him speak in San Francisco last week. Hey, Gifty, welcome. So what do you see when you look at this? I'll make it bigger.
Attention decreases over time.
Right, okay, so the black bar is study, right? And the gray bar is study test. So if you're about to get ready to take a test, what do you do if you are an 18-year-old at Auburn University? 19 cram. Right, study, test, right? So what this research found was that it's actually less. So if you study for 5 minutes, it's pretty high, your units recalled, right? And study test is less effective in the 5-minute testing. In the very short-term memory, right, it'll work for you. Study, after 2 days, if you study, after 2 days, you recall less than if you do study test. So in more popular literature, this is known as interleaved practice or self-testing. So as you're studying, you encourage your students to test themselves because the testing effect says it's not the studying, it's the testing that improves your recall of the information over the long term. So another study that Roediger did was you have 4 units, right? 4 10-minute units, supposedly. And then he did a test of study, test, and then study, test. And who did better? Who do you think would have done better in that? Study. Yes! You would think that it would be study, test, because that's more studying. But it was actually study, test that did better. That's the testing effect. How do we translate that for us, right? If the testing effect works, and there's some recent research in the resources that can test that a little bit, but we'll talk about it in a second. So, what are our barriers as teachers to frequent quizzing? Time, yes, that's a big one. Time, what else?
I would be afraid that they would stop caring or stop being motivated after a while. If we did a quiz every day.
Right. So burnout, really, right? What else? What about the time? What's the time element have to do with quizzing?
Time to come up with questions.
Right.
Are you doing it in class? Takes class time. And then grading.
Then there's also the closing the loop part. If they did terribly, then you have to reevaluate what you're doing next continually.
Right. So I like what you're suggesting because you're the loop. You're talking about how it gives you feedback as an instructor to quiz often. That's nice, Jessica, thank you. And so in a way, I don't believe in like magic bullets, but well-timed, frequent testing that doesn't kill you in these areas would be a good way to both get feedback about your teaching and also what your students are learning. Any other barriers to quizzing? We've come up with a good list. I don't have one in my mind. I want to be clear about that. It could be that there are no more barriers. Maybe not. These are pretty good barriers. Okay, great. So, if we could save time on all of these fronts in these ways, it might be a good thing to think about. This process that we're about to go through with the scratch-off sheets can be modified for individual or team-based learning, is self-graded, so you don't grade it at all, and helps structure instructor comments in the class. I'm missing the parentheses there, sorry. So these are some pretty big benefits to the process. If you have a mobile device, or I guess I could lead us through this. How many of you have mobile devices? Raise your hand. If you would like to, use your device and go to epsteineducation.com. I'll pull this up on the big thing for the rest of us. And then click on the answer sheet and review the step-by-step. I'll show you. It's not a video. Okay, so here's the little doodad I'm talking about, this scratch off here. So it'll give you a step-by-step. Yes, the answer is yes, it will be bigger. Okay. Here's the test. The answer to question 1 is D. The star underneath indicates that that's the right answer. So then the student exits the question knowing what the right answer is, kind of important. So then in the next step, ruh-roh, did a scratch and was not right. So then the student actually has another chance to try again. Hey! And get partial credit. And so if I scratch twice, I get X amount of a fraction of a point, right? More importantly, I understand what the right answer is. In a moment of weakness, can you read that? The student decides to try to cheat. However, the stars are sporadically placed, right? So the star could be down here. The student thinks about the question again. Right, yay, star! Okay, so this is the process. Then you write in the score. So you think you're ready to try this? I'm going to give you the full Mac Daddy version of it, which is you will take the test individually first, and then I will group you up by years of time at Auburn, and I'll show you why in a second. We'll take one of each and pass it down. Because guess what the quiz is about? Auburn. Woo! Yes, it is. Okay, here we go with the process. So what you'll do once you get your test and answer sheet is you'll have about, I don't know, how many minutes do you think it will take to take a 10-minute quiz about Auburn? Oh my goodness gracious, do we have exactly the right number of quizzes? That is so exciting! Okay, your answer sheet's coming around. What do you think, 10 minutes? 10 questions, 3 minutes? Sure. Okay. Maybe 4.
Low stakes.
Yeah, low stakes, it's no big deal. Who needs more time? You good? So you have your answers. So here are the teams. Listen carefully, because you're gonna have to move. We don't really have time for me to use the team-based learning technique to put you in teams, so I just sort of distilled them y'all into teams based on time here. So, great. So now I will give you a little scratch off, and you'll do the quiz again.
No, we need
It's worth 10 points. If you get the right answer after the first scratch, you get a full point. If it takes you 2 scratches, you get half a point. If it takes you 3 scratches, 0.25. You're our expert, okay?
The group activity?
Yeah, you all do it together.
I feel like winning games.
I don't know if she's.
So when you're finished, go ahead and score your sheets and then put your score up.
One scratch is 1 point.
Wow.
Two scratches is 0.5.
Nice.
You're 1,
$0.25.
you're 2, and you guys are 3.
I've also heard the.
0.25.
0.25.
And then this one.
And what does that mean?
C, so
Perfect nation, did you say?
Yes.
Nation. Okay, and you guys, put it up there.
You get 775.
I know, that's
7.75.
Yes.
What was he?
Okay, so, what was the most challenging question on the quiz? This is how you might debrief with your students. What was the most challenging question? And why?
Anything with years.
The date.
The dates were challenging. Why were the dates challenging?
Difficult to get memorize the dates.
It was hard to memorize the dates. Right, absolutely.
It's hard to eliminate by process of elimination.
Right. So based on this, so then that would make the question about when women were admitted the hardest question? Is that fair?
Yeah, this was hard. I got 0 and I got 0 and 0.25 and a 2.
Which one's it?
Right, okay, good. So that's valuable feedback for you. If you're in a class, they're actually gonna make a class about Auburn in the world. So part of this information will probably be part of that class. If you were actually in that class, you would say, oh, I really need to spend a little bit more time with the dates, just so I could perform better. And if I'm the faculty member teaching the course, I could think, okay, I need to sort of interleave, put it more in my discussion with the class about the dates. Good. And if we wanted to, we could talk about how do you remember dates. I think the year women were first admitted is 1892.
1802.
Right. And the way I remember that is the gay 90s. I don't, that's how I remember it from. That was the big golden age, right, of uproarious fun. It was so fun that we let women in Auburn University. That's how I remember it. But, so, those kinds of things are how you would, and so, instead of lecturing over the whole swath of history, we're just spending time on the things that, the sticking points, right? Questions about that up to that point? How else might you guide your students at the end of a quiz like this, in the debrief? How would you, so I started with what was the most challenging question and why, and you guys came right away with the dates. What else might you ask students who had just taken this quiz to kind of debrief, to make sure?
The other side, what was the easiest?
Okay, good. What was the easiest one?
Number 1.
Number 1. And why is it easy?
A daily thing, we know it all the time.
Right. It's everything.
But not the mascot.
Right. It's not the mascot. It's almost everything. Okay, good. So keep looking at the questions, and now we're going to go a little meta with it, right? Describe the energy in the room as you were taking the quiz as a group. It was fun. Yeah, it was. You guys were really, there was a lot of yays and ohs. So a lot of times people just want to hear yays, but the oh is really kind of fun too, Because if you heard your students reacting that way to taking a quiz, that is just going to automatically, especially in these times of trouble, April is the cruelest month around here, right? It's a nice uplifting way to begin class, to get a sense of where they are, a pre-check, and then move forward. So if you're interested in using these, there's a few things to think about. One is they're not accessible for blind students. So you would either have, the student would have a reader to read the quiz, or if you're using them, the scratch-offs in this setting, it's not an issue because if you have the student take the quiz individually with a reader, then someone else in the group can do the scratch-off. Does that make sense? The other way you can use the quizzes is that people just take them individually, every person gets a sheet. And they have long ones that you can reuse, like 1 through 10, 10 through 20, right? What do you miss? If you just have people take it individually,
Discussion.
right, the discussion isn't there, the energy is a little bit less exciting. So there's ways to scaffold using them for yourself, but the most fun way is to have small groups use them. And then on the grading end, for most classes I've used this with, there's an individual quiz grade and then the group quiz grade. And we negotiate. For you all, how many of you did better as individuals on the quiz? Nobody? Okay, all right then. So what part of how do you want to ratio the individual to team grade?
Whole team.
Right, all team, right? It can't be all team, there has to be some individual. So typically you want to set some weights, right? It can't be less than 25% for either, right? And so typically it's best to have this negotiation with your students after they've done a practice test, so they can see how the wisdom of crowds bubbles up and can positively affect the grade. Make sense? Okay, so now let's turn any questions so far about the process? So we'll turn our attention now to actually writing quiz questions. Writing good multiple choice questions.
Actually, I have a question.
Okay, good.
What about makeup exams or quizzes? How would that work if it's supposed to be in a group?
Right, so makeup would be without prior, so say I know I'm going to be out of class because I'm going to give a presentation at the American Chemical Society. I don't know. Not going to happen, but maybe, I mean, you never know. If the student works it out with you prior to, they can take the quiz individually, and then they can't, the group part, they can't have a part of that, right? Does that make sense? For one quiz, if you give them like every other class or once a week, it's not going to totally derail their grade if they can't have access to the group. But the reason why you can't have access to the group is they're not contributing. So that's one way to do it. There's other, like you could make them available online. I am still looking for the online version of this scratch off because, yeah, that would be great. So you could just put it up in Canvas. And then in their small groups, they could do it out of class, just like you said.
I have what's the guy that like father of team-based learning or whatever the guy?
Larry Michelson.
I have one of his books, and he mentions an electronic version, and to contact them about it. I haven't done it.
The website for team-based learning is teambasedlearning.org. So if you're wanting to just dig around in all of the resources. And before we move away, we must acknowledge Team 1's dominance, right? Oma has won, clearly.
Another question about makeups. Would you, so let's say that you weighted the team quiz was 80% and the individual was 20%, and then they had to do a makeup individually. Would you let their makeup count for both? Like they would get the same grade for both?
Sure, I mean, that's up to you. It's not like, yeah, that seems like a feasible option, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome, thanks.
So you would always have to pair the individual and the group. You would never just do the group without an individual test.
Sure, why not? That's another way to use it.
Well, I would worry that there would be like a competition part of it. Like even having, like I played games with students and residents before, and they got very upset when things didn't go their way, and like it kind of put a damper. So I could see in a group, if I was only a group setting, I'm like, I know the answer is D, but everyone else says B, so we go with B, and then now my grade has suffered but I knew
right.
the answer.
Right.
And no one listened to me, and so I could think like, if you only did the group, you would have people who would fight you on it and
Right.
come and
I've
test
never
the
only
grade.
done the group, I've done individual
You need
and
to do
group.
both.
And in the team, if you're really going super turbo with it, in the team-based learning version, there's an appeals process if a question isn't good. So the team, the way the appeals process works is, usually there's folders. I would have handed you a folder with the quiz and the answer sheet. You take it individually, get together. In the folder is the appeals form, which says which question was faulty, explain why it's faulty, use the text to support your interpretation of the right answer, and then submit it. So some faculty get a little antsy about that kind of questioning of authority, but if you're sending students to the source material and they're finding answers that are compelling, that seems like a rich learning moment for your students. And it also helps with the questions. Now, I have more than one time, sadly, got screwed up on the answer key and right, there's an answer key for each sheet. And so you would want of course you want the right answer to be on where the star is. So every once in a while that happens. That's just an accident, we're all good. Other times, there are some problems with the question. So I wanted to take a minute to think about good question writing. And so this is a site, Derek Broth is a faculty developer at Vanderbilt, and he has written a book about clickers. So all of this stuff can be used with clickers too. Okay, I'm not going to read this to you. But you want to make sure the stem is clear. The stem part is the question, right? It should not contain irrelevant material, right? Here's something that's interesting. The stem should be negatively stated only when significant learning outcomes require it. Right. Which of the following is not true about mitochondria? Is not as good as this, except, all of the following except. That's a question.
What's the difference between all of the following are true except and for all of the following except? Why is that upper right negative phrasing bad?
Well, let's take a look. If a significant learning outcome requires negative phrasing, such as identification of dangerous lab or clinical practices,
Oh, that's good.
the negative element should be emphasized with italics or capitalization. See, but that one doesn't have italics or capitalization, does it? The only difference is that this is like a lab situation,
Right.
and this one isn't.
That's a significant learning outcome.
Right. I mean, I'm guessing with these questions, you want to make sure that the students in your lab know how not to burn it down.
Right.
Not to use a negative phrasing inappropriately. Okay. STEM should be a question or a partial sentence. So blanks are not as effective. So if you have your device, take a minute to look through these. These are alternatives. How many times have we, right, so E is an implausible alternative here, right? And I am so guilty of implausible alternatives. But, common student errors provide the best sorts of distractors. So there's all kinds of information here. I wanted you want to say something, Mark?
I just
found it funny, the implausible alternatives. The implausible alternatives aren't implausible for those people that don't know the information.
Right, exactly.
And so, you know, using implausible alternatives means that, I mean, granted, I don't think anyone would include Snoopy
Right,
on a test about DNA,
right.
but, you know, part of it is in that field, if you're in molecular biology, you should know who's responsible. And you should know if I put, you know, Madame Curie down, she's not,
Yeah.
but she's definitely a prominent member in the field of science. So, I mean, I tend to argue a little bit with that because I think that implausible alternatives mean that the student is well informed of the field or the discipline. So, I'm guilty of that too.
But
That's why I said
but another way to think about it is, when I use an implausible alternative, it's because I just got tired of thinking of plausible alternatives. And so what is the message I'm sending my students if I put Britney Spears as one of the, do you see what I'm saying? Like you want them to understand that you're taking quizzing seriously. Like you really, it's a meaningful activity for them and for you. So I'm a fan of implausible alternatives sometimes. You know, like obby is probably going to be an implausible alternative around here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But overuse of them can indicate something that you don't want your students to pick up. Or that is just isn't true. You know, you're just trying to have a little fun, not being unmindful. So let's take a look at these questions and try to, which one would you like to rewrite? Is there one that we could do better with? I didn't actually, Leah made the questions up for us, so I didn't plant an ineffective question here. Okay. I'm gonna go back up here. Are any of them? Oh, I want to look at this with you guys. Writing multiple choice items to test higher order thinking. Multi-logical thinking. So questions that embed more than one kind of fact. So looking at the questions you have here in your group, take one and revise it to a multi-logical question. I'll make this what a multi-logical question is larger, and you're welcome to Google Writing Good Test Questions Vanderbilt to bring this up for on your device. Multi-logical thinking is thinking that requires knowledge of more than one fact to logically and systematically apply concepts to a problem. So you're generating a question that's a problem.
Okay.
Like revise one of these questions into a multi-logical. Does that make sense? What the question is? Use one of these questions. You're going to have to use your knowledge of Auburn to make a problem, right?
Auburn played during the Civil War.
So like a multi-answer.
No, a problem that requires a few steps of knowledge. So, and it could be any problem about Auburn. I was just trying to give you a jumping off point. So maybe it's,
There's an item they're trying to do. There's an item next to Stanford Hall.
well, I happen to know that they sold 87,000 bottles of water at the first home game at Arkansas, right? So is there a problem I could generate that would embed, first of all, you need to know that football season begins in late August, that it's hot as
Maybe they know what's next to it too.
here in late August,
I
right?
didn't know there was a late,
And then
but I knew that they.
something about water consumption, right? And I also know that they dropped the prices on their two biggest concession items this at football season, which are hot dogs and bottles of water. So you can buy a bottle of water in the stadium for $1.
That's awesome.
Right, and you can buy a hot dog for $1. By dropping the prices, they actually increased revenue, that was the goal. But also, you want people who are hot, sit in 97-degree heat in direct sun to have water. So that's an example of, I can make up a problem that pulls all of those things together that has something remotely to do with Auburn history.
What item?
So, multi-logical meaning means you'd have to know a few things. So you don't have a question. It's kind of hard, isn't
That's
it?
that, to me,
And I
that's
don't
the
do this
trivia.
ever, so
That's
it's
the
like,
whole main aspect.
I don't
It's
understand how to get a multilogical question when all we
Yeah, so
have
the
here
late
are
next
factual statements. Like there is no problem at hand.
I don't know. I
Like
also
that's how
don't
it's
know
described.
how
Like that's when I'm like, I'm grabbing onto
That's
that
not-
statement of like multilogical means problem.
Right.
But all of these statements are just factual, so it's regurgitation. So I don't know how to make, I could probably write one from like scratch, maybe.
Right, go ahead.
Is that okay?
But these are all just like, I think I just don't understand it. Of how,
Because even if
what's
you don't-
the difference between a multilogical and
if you know what
something
a
else.
lane
And we're still
is,
just asking them
You
to
have to figure it
pick
out.
a statement,
You
like
don't
what
know
is
what
the
lane
name
is,
or what
you
is the
know
thing.
that
Yeah, I don't understand how it's different.
armor plane.
So I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna talk about that. So what are you coming up against with writing multi-logical higher order thinking questions? What is it?
Well, it's difficult to construct in a way in which there's a single answer.
Right, difficult, yes. They're still struggling with it over there. Do you have one?
I think it's better,
That's
that
the-
explanation made no sense to me. Like, I don't think any of us got it. But these questions make sense. It's like just like combining two questions.
Right.
I think if that's how I had looked at it before, it wouldn't have been nearly as difficult, but we were just not getting it. So,
I didn't
we
mean
have
to-
one of like, when Auburn was chartered, what was the name of the library?
Ah, that's nice.
Nailed it.
It's just long enough.
What's up?
Oh, no.
Oh.
Nailed it.
Okay, good. So if you wanted to make that a problem-based question, to me, like when people use the word problem sometimes, to me it's just a story. So you're a grad student working on a history of Auburn University, and you're trying to locate the library at the time it was chartered. On a campus map, what's the name of the building you would look for? So it's just a narrative around this, right? But it takes time to develop those skills, right? So multi-logical helps your students also apply strings of facts and ideas and concepts. Do you make every question on a scratch-off multi-logical? Goodness, no, right? And you certainly want to build up toward it. So there's not only a method to writing questions well, there's a method to structuring quizzes well to both help students warm up, flex their muscles a little, and sort of finish with a bang with a big multi-logical question. Often when we have clicker PDSs, I wonder if we might the very next day have a question writing workshop where you bring your content and then work together to form questions, big, hard questions. But the key, again, and from Derek's website, is that you don't make questions hard to make them hard. You make them challenging to meet the learning goals, right? So the significant learning is embedded in the question. Did you want to say something?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that was our issue with writing this test question, is that we all wanted to test different parts of the question. I
Right.
think, so like, some of us wanted to test how well people know where things are on campus. And then, you know, like, or is it, do we want to be asking about the history of, or the history of how the town and the campus relate? And so this was really hard without knowing what our learning objectives were.
Ah, very good point. Very good point.
If it was just trivia,
Right,
how do you write a,
right.
higher order thinking trivia?
That's tough, isn't it? Good. Good. Anything else about writing effective questions? Okay. So, we have a few minutes left. I wanted to give you individual time to think about writing questions, and if you needed, to get feedback from each other. So now, You've done your good group work. Thank you for the group work. If you'd like to move back to where you were sitting, you can take 5 minutes to think about first the learning objectives for a course you want to add a quiz to, and then some potential quiz questions. Because right here, we've all just gone through this experience of learning about writing questions. So you have 5 minutes to write some questions and then get some real swift feedback. And also, we have extras of these scratch-off sheets if you'd like to pilot in your class using them. We will subsidize you for 1 semester, and then we will, if you decide you like it, you can figure out how you're going to pay for them for the rest of the time that you're using them. Make sense? Did you get any more clarity in what multi-logical means or how to test higher order thinking? And if you did, what was it? Could you just, let's wrap up with how it was a little bit tricky, but some of you seem to be making some progress. So, what'd you come up with? This is another metacognitive question.
So I came up with one question. I showed a graph, and the first question that I asked about the graph was obvious, just kind of checking to know, based on this graph, they could figure it out, whether or not they knew the content. But then the second question asked them to make a connection between their answer for the first question and other facts about tree physiology that they would have had to learn in the class. And so you couldn't actually get that from just looking at the figure. They would have to know that
something.
connecting information between, yeah, basically applying what is easy to get from the context, applying it to a different question. I thought that was kind of the point.
Yeah, that's the point, definitely.
But I also put one of my answers was, I am unable to tell from this information. I don't know if that's good or not.
Tricky.
Like, I couldn't tell if that was the.
That's almost like Snoopy, isn't it?
It's
A
like-
little bit like a,
All of the
But
above,
it's-
none of the above kind of.
But it tests them because they would be able to tell from the information if they didn't know how to apply that information.
right.
So it would show me if a lot of the students didn't.
It would illuminate for you what part they didn't know, which is good, valuable information, good. What else? Any other, you guys seem to be moving with your protocol. And in fact, did you notice? Assess the effectiveness of that protocol, right? Creating a problem question. I think we are thinking more about like a scenario and then kind of figuring out, because that's more of what we're doing, rather than just like a factual thing every time, trying to present a real life thing that they'll have to encounter, then working through that. So I don't know if that fits the definition of multi-logical. It does. Anytime you have to make a choice based on a, you're just building choices. Omar had a question that it took me a long time to understand, and I'm not quite sure that I understand it now. But he was saying that, say you give this test, right? If a student just randomly picks B, they might wind up with 4 out of 10, right?
Yeah.
Which is still failing. I mean, it's still failing, so it doesn't really matter, right? But he wanted to know if we could switch it up so the student who just randomly picks A or B for the whole thing could, get in trouble for it? Right? Yes, right.
How you fail.
Right, but I mean, I guess they already failed. Like, randomly, there's no control for the student who will randomly choose.
You know, you might get lucky.
Right, you might get lucky, but
But that also breaks down during team.
that's what I said. It does break down in the team, so,
I'm
Okay.
guessing that the guy who's randomly choosing probably will adopt whatever the team says. So he will have absolutely no input into the team,
right.
but he would get great benefit from the team.
Well, other than like a smart quiz that knows what you're doing, like an electronic quiz, or if you take the SAT or the ACT, it knows if you're getting better. Like when you do poorly, it kind of goes back and reverts and does an easier question. Unless you're doing something like that, there are very few tests that can punish you for guessing.
Right. Or in Canvas, you can provide immediate feedback with like guiding questions if somebody chooses the wrong answer. I think you can provide immediate feedback to help them. I mean, that's the whole point of the scratch-offs, is that it gives students immediate feedback. So it's time for us to stop. Thank you for your participation and your time today. Do email me or Leah Matheson if you'd like some sets of the scratch-off for your teams.